All right. It is time for us to begin already. It's already past the time. I believe it's like 7:01, 7:02. Hopefully you guys have been having a good week so far with your Monday and Tuesday. And I'm glad for you guys to be here tonight once again. Just a little update. Dylan Casey got to Florida safely Monday and everything. Everything worked out. The movers met them there. They had a little bit of a hiccup. They couldn't get in the house for about an hour. People had to come out to let them in. But anyway, everything still worked out, and they're just unpacking right now. And I believe Vince and Miriam are already on their way that way. I think they were taking the plane that way. Then, of course, Raina will be back. She'll be back early Saturday morning. And she'll be flying in Greenville. We'll pick her up and then drop her back at the house. Of course, probably feed her close, of course. But anyway, Vince will be back either late Saturday night or early Sunday morning, something like that. All right. If you have your Bibles, let's turn over to Job. Job chapter 1. Job chapter 1. In the first 5 verses of the book of Job, we are introduced to a man named Job, who lived in the land of Uz, who was blameless. You'll find in that text there his qualities, his characteristics. God says that he was blameless, or he's blameless, upright, feared God. He turned away from evil. I mean, can't really get any better than that. I mean, that's pretty good qualities. You know, blameless, upright, feared God, turned away from evil. He was also richly blessed by God in terms of his possessions. Not only with possessions, he was very rich. He had a lot of stuff. He also had family. A pretty big family. Not only that, looking at this, we see him where we're introduced to him. But once you get to verses 6 and 7, the scene kind of changes. It changes to seems a heavenly realm. But we're going to we'll summarize this just a little bit here, and then we'll get to where we're supposed to be. But really quickly, let's kind of have a little bit of a recap. In verse 6 and 7, the scene changes. Now, one of the things that I put forth, and not forget, key thing here is not only we're dealing with suffering, but we're also dealing with Job here. He's innocent. He has not sinned. The suffering, the things that he's going through, he did not deserve it. Job he's a good man. He didn't deserve none of these things. But of course, we're going to notice why. Verse 6 and 7. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. So noticing here, we have this scene. Seems like a kind of a scene of a courtroom, scene of royalty. We have the sons of God. I believe I talked about that just a little bit. Most likely angels. Doesn't say it, but most likely. I also think about, the reason I say that, I think about in the beginning of Genesis. Think about before you the introduction of Noah, how all that wickedness and everything, and it was because of the very beginning. It says there that the daughters of men mingled got with the sons of God, which is basically they're not anyone. Sons of God, it's not angels or anything, which that's what many teach today. I believe they did a movie on Noah. Oh man, you don't have to watch it. It's terrible, terrible. But anyway, they take that concept that the sons of God is angels, and that they mingled with humans or daughters of they are humans. But anyway, these are just regular individuals. But I kind of think of that in some ways when I see that. But anyway, this case here, sons of God, most likely angels. But noticing here, we see this God calls here Satan. Of course, Satan comes forth, and he's coming to and fro. And I think a really good example of that, I believe it was shared last time. What does Satan do? The majority of his time. He's like a roaring lion, isn't he? He's always trying to find us when we're weak, when we're alone. When we're kind of going in our own direction, we're not with the herd of our people. He's always up to no good. But in no way does this mean that God doesn't know where he is. This is a question. This is for us, if you can imagine. This is for us to kind of understand the situation. It's kind of a story, but there's a bigger picture where we're going to see the reason why Job goes through what he goes, through his suffering. So notice the Lord, again, noticing here we see this conversation that begins here with God and with Satan. And Satan is going to challenge God in many ways in questioning Job, his servant. So noticing here in verse 8 through 12 is where we're going to be kicking off, verses 8 through 12. And it says, "And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God, and escheweth evil? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thy hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thy hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord." So there's a discussion here that starts with Satan and with God. It is God who speaks to Satan and asks if Satan has considered the righteousness of Job. Yeah, isn't that awesome? Servant of God here, God bringing about Job here. The Lord agrees with the narration, kind of what we've gone over so far, what's been given to us in the first 5 verses. The Lord says it himself that Job, he's blameless, he's upright, he fears God, he turns away from evil. Now, again, this kind of gives us a picture. Kind of think about the Apostle Paul meant in Ephesians 3:10 when he said that the manifold wisdom of God is made known through the church and in heavenly places or among his people. The Lord tells this heavenly assembly to look at Job. Now, in fact, considering here that the Lord calls Job, not just Job, but he says what? He's my what? He calls Job my servant. Someone said it. He's my servant. So noticing here, again, it's pretty awesome here that the Lord calls him his servant, my servant, this possession here. The Lord says that this is my servant, and Satan should consider his righteous life. Man, the eyes of Satan are now on him now. So Satan then asks the question, noticing here the question for the chapter, for the book, in many ways, for our lives. Does Job fear God for no reason? Does Jeremy fear God for no reason? Notice that Satan does not disagree with the assessment of Job's righteousness. Job is righteous. That's a fact. Satan makes a challenge that Job is righteous only because God, noticing here the reason. You know why he's righteous to you. Because you protect him. You put him in a bubble. You put a hedge around him. You protect his belongings. You protect his family. You protect him. That's the only reason he likes you. He's not that important. So what? So noticing here, if God will remove that hedge and strike all that he has, Job will curse God to his face. He's not going to like you anymore. Basically telling him, you get rid of all this stuff, he's not going to like you. He's going to curse you. So Satan makes a very important challenge of God and of Job. So again, Satan asks why Job fears God. Satan asks why Job is righteous. If being rich is the result of righteousness, then who wouldn't be righteous? This is the insult that Satan makes. Job does not serve you, God. Job serves himself. The only reason he serves you is because, you blessed him. So this is a challenge. This challenge of God is not only about Job, but it is about, in many ways, when you think about it, it's about all of us. God is too gracious, he says, too generous, too kind. People only serve God because he is good to them. They serve from false motives. Another thing you think about here is God is so loving. Satan makes it very clear. He says these things, that God blesses us in every way. He does all these things for mankind and for us. But noticing here, and that's what we hear, from people, Job is interested in God and God's ways, not for God's sake, but for Job's own prosperity, his own selfishness. We hear the devil, he's virtuous, he's innocent for his own benefit. So remove the hedges, remove it, so I can get at him. So notice this. The only thing that God does tell, God's going to allow it, but the only thing that he tells Satan not to do is what? Touch him. Yeah, verse 12. That's the boundary. That's the limit. You can do all this, but don't touch it. So, noticing here in verse 13 through 19. Again, if there's any questions, any thoughts, please raise your hand. But we'll go through this. So, noticing here, disaster strikes in verse 13 through 19. And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabines fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven and hath burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and have carried them away. Ye and have slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Oof, man, that's hard. 13 through 19 is very, very, very staggering amount of disaster hitting the life of Job all at once in many ways. Noticing here the messenger comes to Job to report that the Sabines took his oxen and donkeys and killed his servants. Then you see a second messenger comes to report that fire of God fell from heaven, burned up the sheep, burned up the servants. Then another messenger comes to report that the Chaldeans raided his possessions and took his camels and killed all the servants. And then finally, fourth messenger, I think I said 4 messengers. Finally, the messenger comes to report that while his children were feasting, having a good time, family time, in their oldest brother's house, a great wind came across and caused the house to fall, killing all of his children. That's really terrible. It's really sad. Think about it just for a moment. Just kind of we don't like to think about that, but put yourself in Job's shoes if you've lost your children all at once. It's very sad. So noticing here what Satan does here is very sinister. Not only is this staggering amount of loss all occurring within a moment notice, and not only does Job have it all, he loses it all, in a single day. But what Job loses and how it happens sounds like in many ways, if we're kind of individual coming, finding out about this, we would kind of think in our minds, maybe, it sounds like the judgment of God in many ways. But I can't help but think about Deuteronomy chapter 28, 31 through 35. You can turn there if you like. If not, notice here, just lend me your ear. But Deuteronomy chapter 28, 31 through 35 says, your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Your donkey shall be violently taken away from before you, and shall not be restored to you. Your sheep shall be given to your enemies, and you shall have no one to rescue them. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to other people, and your eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all day long, and there shall be no strength in your hand. A nation whom you have not known shall eat the fruit of your land and produce of your labor, and you will be only oppressed and crushed continually. So you shall be driven mad because of the sight which your eyes see. The Lord will strike you in the knees and on the legs with severe boils, which cannot be healed, and from the sole of your foot to the top of your head. Now, this is a passage not about Job, but it's an example of one of God's judgments on his people, you know. And it's very, very, very terrible. And so we kind of see this, similar idea, kind of what's happening. But again, it goes back to the whole message that Job is what? He's innocent. He's done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong at all. But Satan has made it appear to all that God has struck Job down for sinfulness and for disobedience. Yet that's not the case at all. That's far from the truth. Those are really hard passages. So noticing now in verse 20 through 21, the response of Job. In verse 20 through 22, verse 20 through 22, Job 1, 20 through 22. Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord had taken away. Blessed be the Lord, the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So, what will Job do? He lost everything. He lost all his possessions. He lost his kids. He lost it all. So what will he do? In verse 20, Job shows an expression of pain and mourning by tearing his robe, shaving his head. He was in a lot of pain. It's really bad. But then notice that Job falls to the ground and worships. Falling to the ground is this physical posture of recognizing and accepting in many ways a significant act of God. Examples of that is Genesis 47:31. You'll see that in 1 Kings 1:47, and again in Exodus 4:31 and Exodus 12:27. So we see here, even all these things has happened. He shaved his head, he tears his clothes, but Job, he sees all this disaster, yet Job worships God. Out of this whole terrible, what happened to him? So, don't say something. It's really, it's incredible in every way. So, noticing here in verse 21 and 22, and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord had taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Whether God gives or whether God takes away, God must be praised. He must be worshipped. This is the godly, righteous response. I will fear God for nothing. I will not fear God because of what He gives me.
But Job he didn't feel everything that much until he lost his children.
Mm-hmm.
All the possessions and service times, but it's bad. He's with it, but he didn't do the sackcloth and ashes and all until he heard his children.
Mm-hmm. The pain of it all. It was really hard. So noticing here that Job, he he does the exact opposite, of what Satan says Job will do. Noticing here that both Job and God are, in many ways, vindicated. Job has shown that he will serve God no matter what, not only when God is good to him. Further, God is vindicated. God can bless people, and people will serve him, not because of the blessings, but because of who God is. But, it's really hard. I've seen people who have lost a lot. I've seen people who have even lost family, and it's very hard. Noticing here again the question that Satan asks is the question that is what I was saying before in the beginning. For all of us, do we serve God for nothing or only because God has put like a hedge around us? God has been blessing us. Do we serve God because we love God, or if we lost everything, would we still be here on a Wednesday night? Would we still be here Sunday? Would we still be faithful to God if all these things happen to us? If we've lost, one of these things, and the worst one, is our kids, our family. Not only that, maybe a spouse. But again, will we serve God even if there's absolutely no physical benefit for us to receive anything? It really goes back and it kind of echoes to what, Jesus, always been trying to teach his disciples, that there's going to be heartache. It's not going to be easy, that we are to take up our cross and to follow him. And it's not easy. You think about, others who served God. Daniel and his 3 friends proved that they served God for nothing. Joseph proved that he served God for nothing. But, it's hard to lose everything and still say, Lord, you can take it all the way. I come into this world, naked with nothing. I'm going to leave it, naked and nothing. It's really, it really makes you think. It really does, and what he does, because Job is no one special. He's just a man. But again, as I said before, Job never sinned. He hasn't done nothing. He's very innocent in all of this. He didn't deserve any of these things. But noticing in the very end of verse 22, it concludes the chapter, and it says, "In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly." You think about that. This is the goal through our suffering, through tragedy, through trials. Do not sin. Do not charge God. The things that we go through in this life. And it's hard. It's very hard. You can't serve God out of selfishness, and we have to continue to serve him and to worship him. Because again, he's our creator. We are to live for him. We are to worship him. We are to love him. But, when the world sees that, it's really hard for the world to understand that, right? They see a God that doesn't care. They see a God that, why do you follow him? He doesn't care about you, obviously. No. It's really clear in Scripture that, when we're faithful, when we're continue trying to be the best that we can be as Christians, we're going to go through things in this life. And we go through that fire, and when we get out of it, we're going to be a lot better than what we were before. Any thoughts before we move on to chapter 2? Chapter 1 really makes you think about things.
Even though that was the first time that God accused someone that was righteous, that was just the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That other people throughout history have gone through the same challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be careful when there's loss, not to jump to the conclusion that it's punishment for sin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good point. Very good point.
Because the devil still accuses the ones that are faithful.
Mm-hmm. Still does. Mm-hmm.
One person I can think of that before this that lost his life. But he was as Eddie Wilkes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he worshiped God the way he's supposed to do, given the proper. He died, not God, you know, not like this.
Because of an action of another. You know, that's the other one as well, of suffering what we go through in this life. You know, because of other people's decisions. You know, it's a really good point. Let me see here. We'll get into chapter 2 in just a moment. Just a reminder, I've been doing, one of you guys wrote a thing that you wanted some study homework to take home. So you don't have to do it. No pressure. No pressure at all. Anyway, I'll be putting them in your mailboxes. I put this one last Sunday for Job 1, just for your personal use. You want to have something to study at home before Wednesday night. I put chapter 2 already in your mailbox, so be sure to check your boxes. I put chapter 2 there. Real quickly, I'm going to go through them here. Who is the main character of the book of Job? Well, it's Job. What is Job's initial status and character description? Job is described as a wealthy and righteous man who fears God, shuns evil. He is blessed with a large family, abundant possessions, and a respect position in society. Again, I'm not sure if you guys did it, but here's my answers for them. What happens in the heavenly council in Job chapter 1? Well, remember, God calls a meeting in the heavenly council. Satan, the adversary, comes before God. God asks Satan if he is considered Job, pointing out his blameless and upright character. Fourth question, what challenge does Satan pose to God regarding Job? Again, if you remember, Satan suggests that Job's righteousness is motivated by the abundance of blessings and protection that God has granted him. He challenges God to remove these blessings, believing that Job will curse God in response. And then the fifth one, how does Satan test Job's faith and blessings? Well, Satan takes everything from him, doesn't he? Except for he doesn't hurt him, but he takes everything else that's around him, his possessions and his family. Number 6, how does Job respond to these calamities? Despite the immense grief and devastation, Job, he remained steadfast. He did rent his clothes, he did shave his head because of mourning, but he still stayed faithful, even after all that. Again, remembering, he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And he still praised him. He still worshipped him. And then lastly, what is the significance of Job's response to his suffering? And I put Job's response shows his unwavering faith and trust in God, even in the face of immense loss and suffering. And it also highlights his righteousness and devotion to God. And then lastly, bonus question, how does the story of Job's suffering and his response challenge or inspire you in your faith? And that's a bonus personal question. All right. So like I said, I do have sheets here, but they're in your mailbox over there. If it's not in there, I'll give you one. It should be Job chapter 2 for the next questions. So the first chapter of Job, again, what we looked over so far, Job, God allows Satan to take away these things, and Job still is faithful. He's still faithful to God, even he did these things. So noticing here that we see a second round of a discussion here with God and Satan in verse 1 through 3. It says this. And again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, from whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, perfect and upright man, one that feareth God. Hold on. Make sure I got the right verse here. I had to double check. All right, so notice there again, verse 3, and the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God, and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast in his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. So, noticing the first three verses of chapter 2 start the same as verse 6 through 8 in Job chapter 1. It's the day when the sons of God they presented themselves before the Lord. Satan is still doing all what he does. He's doing the same thing, going to and fro, like a roaring lion. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. But as we saw in chapter 1, God's question is not for his benefit, but again, it's for us. It's for his readers. God, again, is showing us the motive, the purpose of Satan. And then God draws Satan's attention to Job again. And noticing here, he says that he's blameless, upright, fears God, turns away from evil. Man, I can't help but think about it in some ways that, we go through life and we go through some kind of trial and we get out of it. And then it happens again, And sometimes we have in our minds, man, I got through this and then now I'm going through something else. But I just can't help but think about it here with God here. He's, bringing attention once again to Job with Satan. But noticing here that there's one new statement in the end of the discussion here, which is found in the end of verse 3. He says, he still holds fast his integrity, although you excited me against him to destroy him without cause or without reason. So God declares that Job maintained his integrity. He has remained blameless. He has not cursed God to his face, as Satan declared that he would do. Job does not have false motives, from what we saw. Job is not hypocritical. He's not a hypocrite. He's faithful to God despite losing his children and losing his possessions. He's still faithful to God. Now, we should also notice that God, noticing here, takes ownership of what has happened. God does not say that Satan did this, and God's really upset that Satan did this, and now God has to fix this. Noticing here that we've learned in our studies throughout the scriptures that there's nothing that happens in this world that is not under God's rule or, God knows about it. We cannot, in many ways, we cannot try to justify or defend God by saying that Satan did this action against Job outside the power of God. Satan is not more powerful than God. Satan, he needed permission. He couldn't act on his own. He needed to ask God, can I do these things? Of course, God said at that time, you do all these other things, but you can't touch it. Don't touch my servant Job.
But I got to talk here. Really, back up to chapter 1, and it just comes to my mind, I have to ask this question. God knew the end from the beginning. He already knows all I am.
Yeah.
So, how foolish was it of Satan to I guess, dare God or
Yeah.
or to tempt God, if you will, however you want to term it. And it just kind of blows my mind that Satan has to know that God knows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, in the end, we have to conclude that all of this is important for us so we understand what real faith is.
Mm-hmm.
And have an example for that.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I just can't help to think about him saying just kind of like, what else? Well, what else can I lose?
Satan is, he is the king of destruction.
Mhm.
This is problems.
Mhm.
That's what Satan does.
Yeah. Mhm.
And
Yeah, either way. Either way. That's a good thought, a very good thought. So, noticing here, not only did Satan need permission from God to do the things of what he had to do, but God, again, he constrained Satan in verse 12, chapter 1. But what God says here is important for our consideration about how God runs the world, especially in regards to suffering. This action against Job did not happen without God's knowledge, agreement. God takes responsibility for what happened in Job chapter 2 and verse 3. God does not say that Satan did it, though he did, but rather God says that he did it himself. Noticing there, he says, the end of verse 3, and still he holds fast to his integrity, although, noticing here, you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. So, but it's not the only time where, the book tells us that God did this. It's very interesting what we're going to see later on in Job chapter 42, verse 11. In Job 42:11 says, then came there unto him all his brethren and all his sisters, and all they had been of his acquaintance before, and did eat bread with him in his house. And they bemoaned him and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. Every man also gave him a piece of money, and every one an earring of gold. So God doesn't shy away from that, which is pretty interesting. But noticing here that we're not given a solution, to these words, at the point of this book. But I think it's important to observe that God, does indicate that the answer to the problem, the suffering is that, it's not his fault. It's not Job's fault. God's answer is not that, even that he's not responsible. God's answer is not the things in the world, operate outside of his control, that he can't control these things or whatever. No, God controls everything. Everything, whatever happens in this world, God knows about it. He's always in control. So noticing here that God is pictured as fully in charge, that God, he takes the responsibility for what has happened. Now, though, Satan, he's the one that has done the afflicting in Job 1, verse 12. But I find that pretty interesting, noble, better word for it, righteous, is who God is. He's just awesome in every way. So, as we mentioned at the beginning of our study, there's a reason why, again, this book is 42 chapters long. And what we're going to see, the part where, many people skip, those 42 chapters, we're going to see the answer to suffering and how God runs the world, that, it's not easy. You can't answer it with easy answers or cliche answers. The problem that comes from this issue, cannot be solved in just 2 or 3 chapters of what we see here. There's so much that's ahead of us that we're going to see with this big discussion with Job and his friends, and not only with that, with God himself talking with Job. So I'm pretty excited for that. Any thoughts so far? So before we kind of leave this statement, or the end of here, verse 3, we should also acknowledge that God, again, asserts Job's righteousness. Noticing here that God says that he destroyed Job without reason or without a cause. So again, that is a critical component of the book. Job is innocent. Job is righteous. There's nothing, all these things that has happened to Job, he didn't deserve it. So he's not punished for his sins. Job's not receiving what he deserves as a sinner. The suffering that he went through, and he's gonna deal with some more. It's all undeserved. All right, I only got 5 minutes left, and we're going to end it here, guys. So I encourage you guys, please check your mailbox. Put in chapter 2, so you can do that on your own time. If you want to do it, you can. If you don't, doesn't hurt no one. But anyway, just helps to have some extra study till next week. So thank you for your time.